We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. The war has engulfed the European continent. There has been immense loss of life, and meager ground has been lost or won. Legions of soldiers are dead or maimed, and this week there is much more to come. This week we are going to witness the introduction of a new, lethal weapon of mass destruction, never before effective on the battlefields of Europe, and the fighting that would precede it. The death of the poet, the deployment of Allied troops in Gallipoli Peninsula of Turkey, the incitement of a genocide and the Ottoman Empire that would eventually kill 1 million people, and a conference in The Hague consisting of 1,200 wives, mothers, and daughters pleading for the war to end.
April 22nd, 5 p.m. 2.5 miles southeast of Ypres, Belgium, according to an eyewitness.
One could see the landscape bathed in the most beautiful sunshine as though through a veil. It looked like the scene from a fairy tale. Within seconds, 150 tons of chlorine gas were released by the German army into the air, ominously spreading across the field toward the Allies. A member of Königliche Prussians stated, "It was an indescribable, unforgettable image for those of us witnessing this first gas attack at close range. The gas was so potent that the yellow haze could be seen from miles away. A ghostly silence arose on the battlefield, and within 10 minutes, 5,000 French and Algerian soldiers suffocated from the toxic fumes." Commander of the 2nd British Army, General Sir Horace Smith Dorrien stated, "A living wall of green fog, about 4 feet in height, moved towards the French line and spread out to a width of about 180 meters. Soon we heard strange shouts coming from the green fog. The cries became weaker and more incoherent. Then masses of soldiers tumbled upon us from out the fog and collapsed. These piteous retreating men ranked with some of the best soldiers in the world. Their cold-bloodedness and courage was almost legendary. Now they were staggering along like drunks." The Germans were prepared and outfitted with masks. However, as they clambered out of the trenches, they were apprehensive of the lethal effects of the gas. Many of the Germans were inexperienced reserve soldiers and afraid that as they advanced, they would put their lives in danger. But slowly they progressed. Once the gas dissipated, the Germans had only 60 gunners in their way from advancing. A French soldier recalled, "Despite the gas, the French gunners had immediately opened fire with shrapnel until the ammunition was exhausted. Once the Allies ran out of ammunition, the Germans charged the Allies' gunners." A German soldier stated, "Frenchmen, Zouaves, and Indo-Chinese sat or lay on the ground, coughing and spitting. None had any thoughts of fighting back. For them, the war was over." In a half hour, 10,000 Allied corpses lay dead on the battlefield. Once the path was clear, the Germans ran 2.5 miles toward Ypres. At 8:52 p.m., Canadian soldiers were deployed to make a counterattack against the Germans in Ypres. 2.5 hours later, the Canadians attacked. The fighting lasted until morning. The Canadians were victorious in preventing the Germans from gaining any land, but there were 642 casualties.
When the battle was over, the Germans had captured approximately 1,800 prisoners of war, 51 guns, and 70 machine guns. Ironically, there were only 250 German casualties out of 3,000 men. This would be known as the Battle of Grabenstoffel Ridge. It would become one of the most significant battles in the war because it was the first time chemical weaponry would be successful in combat.
2 days later, on April 24th, the German army again released chlorine gas into the air at the Canadian army in the town of St. Julien in Longmark. The Canadians retreated from the town, which would be held by the Germans for 2 years. Even though they were now aware that putting a urinated cloth on your face could prevent inhaling the toxic fumes of chlorine, the Canadians had a total of 6,035 casualties, in which almost 2/3 of the casualties met their end in Gravenstoffel and St. Julian's, Flanders fields. On April 23rd, famous British poet and British Royal Navy officer Rupert Brooke died of blood poisoning. His obituary was written by his dear friend, future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Winston Churchill. Churchill described Brooke as joyous, fearless, versatile, deeply instructed, with classic symmetry of mind and body, ruled by high, undoubting purpose. In Brooke's most famous poem titled The Soldier, he wrote, "If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England." Brooke was deemed a hero throughout Great Britain because, according to Churchill, he was willing to die for the dear England whose beauty and majesty he knew. Sadly, Brooke died 2 days shy of being deployed into Gallipoli. On the 25th of April, British, New Zealand, Australian, and French soldiers were deployed to the Gallipoli Peninsula in the Ottoman Empire, adjacent to the Dardanelles Straits, a narrow body of water that connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara in northwestern Turkey. If the Allies captured that body of water, they would be able to link up with the Russians. Under the skillful leadership of Mustafa Kemal, aka the Ataturk, the Ottoman army was poised and ready to embark in battle. Captain Charles Bean, the official war correspondent with the Australian troops, stated, "Troops went straight into the firing line, where the Turks were already attacking in force too great to allow the digging of trenches. The Allied army suffered heavy casualties, but they were able to set up 2 beachheads on the peninsula. On April 24th, 235 members of the Armenian intelligentsia were arrested and most of them eventually executed in Constantinople, Ottoman Empire, modern-day Istanbul, and Turkey. These events marked the beginning of the Armenian Holocaust. While the men of the world fought on the battlefield, women of the world sought out peace with the organization of the International Congress of Women on the 28th of April. The caucus had 12 countries and 1,200 women in attendance, including future Nobel Prize winners Jane Addams and Emily Green Balch. Athleta Jones, the leader of the Dutch Association for Women's Suffrage, stated, "We can no longer endure in this 20th century of civilization that governments should tolerate brute force as the only solution of international disputes." The destruction of this week can only be concluded by a poem written by Canadian physician Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who wrote this poem after the death of his dear friend Alexis Helmer, who lost his life in the Second Battle of Ypres. McCrae wrote, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly. Scarce heard among the guns below, we are the dead short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields."